I'm going to wrap up our series. It's been, I know, 3 weeks as I was in Africa for, one Sunday that I missed, the Sunday coming back. I didn't want to try, the whole jet lag thing and try to come in and worry about a message. So it's been 3 weeks, but I'm excited to be able to wrap up our series on B and the importance of engaging where you're at. Popular legend has it that on October 31st, 1517, that a man by the name of Martin Luther, anybody heard of Martin Luther? Right, Martin Luther penned and posted in his 95 Theses on the door against the practice of indulgences in the Catholic Church. Martin Luther became one of the most influential figures in Western history. Whether he set out to do that or not, it's exactly what he did when he basically fractionalized the Catholic Church and inspired the Protestant Reformation. Although the tone of his, I find this interesting, the tone of his 95 Theses, it really wasn't challenging. The tone of it was academic in nature. He was someone who was very academically inclined, and so really what it was is just questioning those indulgences and the purpose of it, and why it should be, still go on. And so it wasn't accusatory, but it was rather questioning. And it's interesting about that is his writings quickly moved beyond that of his influence, and other people picked it up and began to run with it. While he distanced himself from those who had taken the cause farther than that of which he had intended, there were other leaders who took up that cause and began to run with it. If you know anything about the history of the Reformation, then you know that the Peasants' War, that it made its way across Germany from 1524 to 1525, and basically it was the German serfs in opposition to heavy taxation and this heavy burden that they rose up. So you had those that were poor and peasants, and so you had this war that came as a result of this because of what Martin Luther inspired. 125,000 combatants and civilians died as a result of the Peasants' War. Think about that, 125,000 people. Now, think about Martin Luther, whether he started out to do it or not, he inspired this radical revolt even among the peasants. And just think about how much weight, do you think about that, how much weight our words carry? I mean, here's someone that set out to bring some change within the Catholic Church, and as a result of that, he had peasants taking up the cause and people taking something that's religious in nature and having that justify their cause. Sounds like a lot of what happens throughout history and still happens here today. People like to use religion, right, to further their political cause. So this went on. What's interesting about that is that's a subject for a different day. If you want to talk about those things, it's a great conversation, and it could be a very heated conversation. But I do want to say this about Martin Luther. Though there was a lot of good and a lot of darkness that he inspired, I think that he is someone that we can say who embodied this idea of being the change that you want to see. And so as I bring to a conclusion this series on B, that's what I want to talk to you today about. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. See, he tried to initiate change through his writings. He envisioned a church that wouldn't take advantage of the poor, and there was a lot of that going on during his time, where there was these beautiful cathedrals and churches that were being built at the expense of these peasant farmers. And people, thought that were given this idea that they could buy their salvation, that they could buy a right relationship with God, that their sins could be wiped out by buying something with their money. And so that's what Martin Luther envisioned, is he envisioned this idea of taking up what Habakkuk had said and what Paul wrote about through salvation by faith and faith alone. And so that was Martin Luther's cause. So he tried to initiate change through his writings. He also tried to elevate the authority of the Bible above that of the authority of man. Right? It's easy for man to assume authority and then to do what he wants. And Martin Luther, he said, that's not right. And so he tried to initiate change against that. And that that people would come to this understanding that the Bible is the ultimate authority and that salvation cannot be bought through indulgences. So Luther, he was a champion of the theological belief that we were righted not by what we do, but by what God has already done. And that's what Martin Luther championed. So if you're on Facebook, then I think you may have noticed that there are a number of different things on Facebook on Tuesday about celebrating 500 years of the Reformation. I thought that Martin Luther would serve as an example of someone who lived out the change that he wanted to see. Now, there were things going on in the Catholic Church, as I just mentioned, that he couldn't go along with. And so he had the courage to question the system. He had the courage to question the system. So let's talk about change. Just the idea of change maybe is something maybe that gets you fired up today, or maybe it's something that scares you, that puts fear in you, because you don't know what that change may lead to. But I want to ask you here this morning, what would you change in our world? What would you change? What would you change in your family? What would you change in our education system, in our church, in our homes? In our marriages? What rubs you wrong and causes you to get all worked up inside? What do you see that you wish today could be different? Here's my encouragement. Here's the big idea of where I want to go with this morning, and that's this. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. And here's the thing. We all see things that we'd like to change. Come on. Right? We all see things. Whether it's at home, whether it's in our lives personally, whether it's in our marriages, our relationships, in the workplace, in the marketplace. Maybe you're a boss here today and you know there's some changes that you should make as a boss. Maybe you work for someone and you know that there's some things you could do a whole lot better to support the cause of your employer. The problem is not so much that there are problems. The problem sometimes is that we want other people to be the solution. Most of us want someone else to be the inspiration, to do the hard work of initiating change. See, it's much easier to talk about problems. It's much easier to complain about everything that's bad and wrong and dark and horrible in our world today, right? There's a lot of people they're very good at that. Man, you can sit them down, you can have a phone conversation, you can have an email conversation. It's all over their Facebook posts where they just complain about, how bad everything is in our world. Complain about the neighbors, and they complain about their teachers, and, just some people, it's just, all they do is just complain. They can point them out. It's much easier to see things in a disconnect from a distance, right? To complain from a distance. But it's completely a different thing to want to be part of a solution. To want to be part of a solution, to do the hard work that is associated with being the change that we want to see. Now this week I was listening to another pastor, and he shared from Genesis chapter 37. We're going to go there, and it's a pretty familiar story, but it's the story of Joseph. But I just want to begin in Genesis 37. We're going to read the first 11 verses, and then I'm going to build a little bit of context and then talk a little bit about the importance of forgiveness. And you're going to see how that ties in with where I'm going. So Genesis, the book of beginnings, chapter 37. All right, are you there? If you need a Bible, there should be one underneath one of the seats in front of you as well. Or as I like to say also, if you need to use your neighbor's Bible, feel free to share. I'm sure they wouldn't mind. Come on, you want to be a good neighbor this morning? All right, Genesis 37. It says, "Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father." All right, so he's telling on his brothers. Okay, we're going to paint a really good picture of the context of what happens here with Joseph. It says, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. So he's a tattletale, and then he's also daddy's favorite. So things are stacking up really well for him here. Because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a tunic of many colors. He gave him a coat, right? He wanted to celebrate him so much. He said, I'm going to set you apart from the other brothers. I don't want you to wear this coat. How many of you would wear that coat? Honestly, Nicole would be like, oh yeah, I'll be all over that. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his other brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream. Say dream. He had a dream, and he told it to his brothers. Great idea, Joseph. And they hated him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream which I dreamed. Then we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers. He's not getting a clue here. And said, look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I, so he brings his dad into it as well. What is this dream that you've dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come down to bow down to earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in hand. So there are a couple things we need to know about human nature here. Right? If you are the favorite and everyone kind of knows it, first, it's just a good idea to be careful. Come on, how many know what I'm talking about? It's just a good idea to be careful with what you say, with how you carry yourself, right? You don't want to draw any more attention to the fact that you're kind of the favorite. So you have to watch what you say. If you have a noticeable advantage, you got to figure out how to handle that advantage in a good way. Because it puts you at a disadvantage with others. How many of you know that to be true? If you have an advantage in life, it puts you sometimes at a disadvantage with others. See, others don't tend to look favorably at the favorite. It's like, when I was a kid, I was good at being the teacher's pet, right? And as long as you're the teacher's pet, it's okay. But how many of you know when you're on the other side and somebody else is the teacher's pet, everybody notices it and they're like, brother, and what's the deal with this and whatnot. So you got to be careful. Joseph wasn't so careful. Secondly, a little self-awareness is helpful and goes a whole long ways. How many know what I'm talking about? Being a little bit self-aware, right? Joseph doesn't show, not only is he not careful, but he's really doesn't seem to be too self-aware. Well, he's 17 years old, so maybe that has something to do with it. But anyways, so he wasn't so careful, and he didn't seem to have a whole lot of self-awareness. So in that sense, Joseph he didn't help his cause. The level of hate just continued to escalate, just continued to grow with every dream that Joseph shared with his brothers. And I was thinking, where was the disconnect? He just didn't seem to put it together. I think this really helps to build the context for what comes next. Now, I'm not going to read any further, but you can go and you can continue reading the story if you want to find more information there. And basically, you'll find it in chapter 37 and then through 45. It's really this incredible story of Joseph's, basically this beginning. He's the favorite, and then he finds himself sold as a slave. So we see in verse 18 that Joseph's brothers, because they hated him, because he was dad's favorite, because he had his own special coat, because he had this advantage, it says that they hated him, and as a result of that, they conspired to kill his brother. But luckily, he had a brother, Reuben, who knew better, and who was looking out for his little brother. And so Reuben said they were going to kill him. Reuben said, no, let's just throw him into a pit, right? Better idea. But Reuben had this idea that he would come back later and save him out of the pit. So he was really trying to do a good thing. But Reuben set that plan into motion. The brothers agreed, and they left Joseph there to die. And, actually, they didn't leave him there to die. Reuben left, and they had a better idea. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. And so they sold him as a slave, right? They took their brother, and they sold him. Reuben later came back. He's gone. He's wondering what happened. He didn't know what happened, just assumed that he died. Then they conspired and put together this plan, took his shirt, put blood on it, and said that he had been eaten by an animal, right? So really, they just weren't very good brothers to Joseph. So verse 27, we're told that he was sold as a slave to the Ishmaelites. So this is where I want to go with this. It is now years later, and a lot has happened since those dreams, and he was first sold as a slave by his brothers. Joseph is now second in command over all of Egypt. He's now second in command over all of Egypt. There's famine in the land of Canaan. And guess who comes before Joseph and end up bowing down before him? Even though they didn't know it was his brothers, it was his brother, it was his older brothers. They come because there's no food in the land, and so their father sends them to Egypt to have a chance at life. And so here they are, and they're bowing down before their brother. And they just don't know who they're bowing to. And so we have this incredible discourse of this emotion that begins to erupt in Joseph as he recognizes his brothers before him. See, they don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. And it's there that he begins to, recall being sold as a slave and rejected by his brothers, and the coat, from his father, and all these memories come flashing before him, and he sends his brothers away, and he has this plan, and then they come back, and they end up bringing their brother, and at one point he reveals himself to his brothers, and he weeps, and he brings them near. And here's the incredible part of that story, is that Joseph really is this amazing picture of someone who learned the importance of forgiveness. Joseph had every reason to be bitter, to harbor resentment in his heart toward his brothers. He was in a position where he could have made them pay bitterly for how they treated him. He could have had his piece of flesh. He could have had his moment of vengeance, his moment of putting them back in their place and making them pay. Here they were bowing before him, and yet he chose a different path. Remember, he had been cut off from his family, from his home, and everything that he knew, and was sent off to a slave in this incredible journey of ups and downs where he's in Potiphar's house, and he's a high man in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife wants to basically lies and says that Joseph tried to sleep with her, and then he's thrown in prison, and so he knows the depths, and he knows this high, and here is his brothers before him. And instead of vengeance, we're told that Joseph extended grace and he extended forgiveness. Somehow he was able to see how God was in that moment of being sold as a slave. When I look at the world, not just what I see in my world, but what I see globally, one of the changes I want to see, that I want to be a part of, that I want to participate in, is that of reconciliation. I want to see reconciliation in my world. If I'm going to be what I want to see, then I'm going to have to be a person who knows, who practices, who lives forgiveness, who breathes forgiveness, who knows how to extend grace and forgiveness to the people around me. This means I'm going to have to learn what it means to foster an attitude and a heart of forgiveness, an atmosphere of forgiveness about my life. I'm going to have to practice it again, live it, give it out, and not just expect it from others. And sometimes that's what we do in our world. We expect others to do certain things and to change, but a lot of times we're not willing to change. We want others to forgive us, but are we willing to forgive? We want others to be reconciled to us, but are we willing to be reconciled to others? This is what it means to be the change that I want to see. Because it always starts with me. It always starts with you. It always starts with us individually. Too often we want it to start with someone else. We want others to change. We want someone else to take the initiative, but it has to be something that comes forth from us. We have to initiate that in our marriages, with our children. I know sometimes even, as parents, and sometimes we think that it should be our children that initiate that process. And if there are hard things going on in our relationship with our children, we expect our children to come to us. But we need to set the example as parents. We need to be humble. We need to ask for forgiveness. We need to make sure we're having dialogue and conversation with our kids. We're paving that way for that. It always starts with me. In Matthew chapter 18, Peter asked Jesus an important question concerning forgiveness. And he said, there's this guy, and I keep finding myself offended by him. Jesus, how many times should I forgive him? What do you think? 7 sounds pretty gracious and generous, right? So he says, hey, 7 times. And Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. 70 times 7. The point is not the number. The point is the atmosphere. It's the mindset. It's the attitude. It's to be one of forgiveness. In response, Jesus said something remarkable. Again, he said, not 7 times, but I tell you 70 times 7. And then he went on to tell the story of the unforgiven servant. And you can read about that in Matthew 18. So Jesus not only says it, but he tries to illustrate it, bring in a story, an example. He said there was this master, and he had lots of people that owed him money, that had a debt to pay. And there was one particular master in that story in Matthew 18, the servant, I should say, who could not pay back his debt. So the master was having a day of reckoning where he was requiring all those who owed him to come and to pay him off. And it's there that this master pleaded for his life. He pleaded for his family, for his children. He begged the master to pardon him, to forgive his debt. And it's there that we're told that the master had pity on him. He had mercy on him. He had grace on him, and he forgave him. Let him walk away, not owing a penny. And as Jesus told that story, so there was the good part of the servant and what he experienced with the master. And then this servant, he turns around, and he too is owed money by somebody. And so he had a day of reckoning with the people that owed him money. And this particular servant came before this servant, and he began to plead his case of, you need to please show mercy to me. Be gracious to me. And it's there that this servant who had just been forgiven of his debt refused to forgive this other servant of his debt. Jesus went on to say, basically, if you can't learn to forgive others, then you yourself cannot be forgiven. Forgiven people forgive others. That's the moral of the story. Forgiven people forgive others. 2 Corinthians 5:18 says that we've been given the ministry of reconciliation. Okay? So I'm going to go sit down. I've been given the ministry of reconciliation. You've been given the ministry of reconciliation. Right? It's not just the guy up front trying to communicate the message. It's all of us. If you are a follower of Jesus today, you have been given the ministry, the responsibility to take this message of reconciliation and to share it with others. You and I have. It's the ministry of reconciliation. It's now a part of who we are. It's a part of the new nature. 2 Corinthians 5 talks about we have a new nature, and part of that new nature is that we've been given the ministry of reconciliation. It's now a part of the new part of us, that part that Christ is at work in, is that part that is being transformed to look more and more like Jesus. It's in our new nature. We are called to lead the way. Not only is it part of our ministry to help people see Jesus, to be reconciled to God, but it's also part of our ministry to be reconciled to one another. Think about that. The ministry of reconciliation is vertical, right, between me and God, and we want to tell that story to others of how they can be reconciled to God. And then it's to be a part of our horizontal life with one another. That's the ministry of reconciliation. It's vertical and it's horizontal. We're to be reconciled to God, and then we're to be reconciled to each other, to love our neighbors, to be reconciled to our neighbor. So the ministry of reconciliation is, again, it's vertical and it's horizontal. We should be the first to lead the way in reconciliation. Right? Just set an example. Whether it be in our homes, whether that be in the marketplace, with our bosses, with our employees, with our children, in the church. Reconciliation should be something we give ourselves to, that we invest heavily in, that we practice, that we're growing in, that we're getting better at. Romans 12:18 should be a verse that we all work to live by. It says, if it is possible, as much as it depends on me, not somebody else, me, that I'm to live peaceably with all men, all women, all people. So when you look at your world, what is one change that you want to see that you can be? Just a few weeks ago, we finished a series on character. We look at our world and there's like, people, where's their, be a person of character. If integrity is important to you, you want others to have integrity, you lead the way. You be a person of integrity. If you want the church to be on fire, to be passionate for Jesus, right? We're always talking about the church and somebody else lead the way. You lead the way. You be passionate. You be on fire. You love Jesus so much that you start rubbing off on the people around you. Right? Let's be the change we want to see. And it's true on a micro level. It's true in the family, in the home. It's true in our marriages and our relationships. It's true right here. And it's also true on a macro level. Right? We have to believe that in some sense that the little things we can do, that those little things can have a ripple effect generationally, right, to the world. So can I encourage you here, again, be the change you want to see. Well, I'm not always a great verbal processor. There are times, though, when talking through things, it's really, I find it helpful. How many of you are verbal processors? That's how you process. You need to verbalize it and then get it out and talk about it, and right? How many of you are more internal? I'm more of an internal processor. And to say that even if you're an external processor, it's good to have times where you internally process. And when you are a verbal processor too, it's good to realize too that not everybody verbalizes their process of thought and whatnot. And so it's just good to be sensitive to each other in that. But recently I was talking just a couple days ago, I was talking to Amy about this idea, my wife, and she brought out the reality of something I hadn't been thinking about, but just the reality of just how messy, though, this can be. Now, I'll be honest, when I think of be the change you want to see, it sounds nice, and it sounds easy, and it sounds fluffy, and it sounds like, anybody could do that. But when you really get down to it, there's a lot of substance and a lot of potential mess that comes with this idea of being the change that you want to see. So I need you to hear this. While this may seem like a nice saying, it doesn't, however, come without a cost. Being the change you want to see, it will cost you something. It will cost me something. It may cost a friendship. In terms of, I just talked about reconciliation, the importance of that, but it may be that you change and you want to go in a direction that somebody that you're close to just is not down with that. They just don't want to be a person of love or a person of hope or a person who, gets into the lives of other people. And so you have to decide, do I want to go? So it may cost you something. It may cost you friendship. It may cost you time. Well, it's going to cost you time. It may cost you heartache of people not understanding you, not getting you. It may be another thing on your plate. It may mean this mess. My wife talked about what it was like when she was a teenager and she started going to church with her family. And I remember Sunday mornings with my family sometimes too. Sometimes Sunday mornings were the worst. Like you get home from church and my brother and I, we've told my parents this, but we like it sometimes, but we'd get home from church and Mom and Dad would fight. And we loved it because we had a 55 Chevy. It was really fast and a 4-speed and no seat belts. And, that's what I grew up with. My dad would grab a couple gears, man. We're flying, around corners really fast. And he'd always blow a drive line or the linkage and just make things worse. But, sometimes that's what it's like. You make a decision to move in a certain direction and you think things are going to get easier and then they don't. You start going to church and it's like all hell breaks loose. Sunday morning, you're having a hard time getting out of the house. You're irritated with your spouse. Your children won't get up. They won't comb their hair and brush their teeth. You always talk about, we're not going to be one of those parents. And then you end up, you look at, you get to church and then you look at your kids. You're like, wow, we are one of those parents. Talked about all the fighting that went on in the home. And you're thinking this should be like a place of peace and where there's good things coming out. And then, you get home and there's like, well, I get it. That's just the reality. Some of our coworkers may not like the fact that you aren't participating in the office gossip anymore. Don't expect people to get excited necessarily when you decide to be the change you want to see, because they may not be. Expect things maybe to get a little messy. But here's the thing, give life anyways. Speak it, write it in your emails. Decide to be someone who gives life, who speaks graciously, who loves other people, who takes risks on people, who meets people where they're at, who's willing to, meet people where they're at and get into the hard stuff of life with people where they're at. Be the change you want to see. Don't expect your spouse to change the instant you start taking your relationship with Jesus more seriously. When you begin ordering your life around Him, it's like everything's going to get easy. Right? I begin to put Jesus first and begin giving and generous with my time and serving others. And, well, it may not turn out that way. Well, it may take time for them to come around. Even if they don't, know that you're making right steps. Your spouse will be watching to see how it changes your life. Your change will leave an impression in the workplace, at school, wherever we go, wherever we carry ourselves. Pursue Jesus, plant seeds, believe for those seeds to take root, be the change you want to see, and realize that it always starts with me. Our mission as a church is to develop devoted followers of Jesus. And I mention that to say that devoted followers of Jesus, they get this. They get that it starts with me. It starts with me.